Hello, Butchie. Welcome back to AusBooks, where I'm just talking about the random Australian books I own, and we're going about it in a chronological way. And I'm having so much fun. It's become a lovely daily thing to talk about. And we're back to nonfiction still because yesterday we talked about William Buckley and his life and adventures. But we have a very different book today because we're officially midway through the 1800s. We're in the 1850s, and that means it's the gold rush now. Gold was discovered in Australia and it changed the country literally forever. People who weren't convicts started to arrive to seek fortune and all that, help encouraged people to explore the continent more than ever before. And it was just a real crazy time that led to violence, Eureka, of course, but also the rise of unions in Australia, which we'll get to later on. But we're sticking to just some books I own about it, really, especially first-hand accounts. I've done a whole video about the Gold Rush book recommendations and all that stuff. It'll be in the description, I'll link it down. But what are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about the one and the only A Lady's Visit to the Goldfields here by Ellen Clacy. I think that's how you say it, Clacy. And yeah, it's one of the most famous first-hand accounts of the Gold Rush. It's not in print anymore. I think it is when it comes to print on demand copies and all that. But in terms of being reprinted as a classic, it just hasn't happened yet. Trust me, I can go on about that. But we don't know much about Ellen's life really before she decides to go to Australia. She was born in England, of course, Richmond, England, in 1830. And she was one of five children, but in 1852 she decided with her older brother to travel to Australia and to go look for gold and get money and all that stuff. So yeah, she left, and that's where the journals start. It talks about what they pack. Ellen has a very great attention to detail here. It's so riveting. I love it so much. But yeah, she went to Australia. She had high expectations. She went to Melbourne first. That's where she arrived in the port, and was completely, utterly disappointed about what she was arriving to, because I think she expected more of a developed colonies than really what was there. And it's really fun to get her reactions to everything. But yeah, in this year-long journal she kept, it's just so interesting because she talks about what it was like to stay there in Melbourne, but also the God knows how many days journey it took to actually just get to the goldfields. They travelled in the bucketing rain, and she really does interview a lot of people. She talks to a lot of people she was traveling with. All of them had guns with them too, which is very interesting. They have shared conversations about crime, because crime was very rampant because of bushrangers and all that stuff, which we'll get to later. Also, just about murders that had happened, and all that fun stuff like that. And I love her diary so much because Ellen is just so judgy. She talks about how a certain person found a bunch of gold and they spent all of it, and she's like, who would do that? Like, I love how judgy she is, because she doesn't know, I think, what she's walking into. But I think she gets the sense of what she's as soon as she gets there, because she gets lost in the bush just casually. But yeah, most of the journals is pretty much her talking about daily life. I'm trying to say that daily life, and talking about certain people she meets, such as the account of a sick grandfather who's taking care of, I think it's an orphan child, and then the grandfather dies, and then she takes on caring for that orphan child, who saves their life later on when it comes to them being robbed. And yeah, just first-hand accounts of what it was like day to day. Very fun, very interesting. She also talks to single mums who were on the goldfields too, because a lot of women, would fall pregnant, and the men would just leave them in the fields, or especially on ships too, on the arrival or when they were leaving Australia and all that. There were a lot of families on the goldfields, and I feel like that's not really talked about as much, just because a lot of the first-hand accounts we have that have become famous don't talk about families. Thinking of the Eureka first-hand accounts and all that completely really ignore there were families in there, let alone what a handful of women mentioned. But Ellen talks about it all, and it's just really interesting if you want to get the context for what did the goldfields look like. It's very fun, very gossipy, really. And eventually, Ellen had enough of being miserable in the goldfields in Australia. She talks about how she went to early Ballarat and Geelong too, which is really cool to see all those places, suburbs, and all that. And she left. She, was like, I'm going home to England. And on the way, she had a baby. She just gave birth on a ship. We don't know who the dad was, but in her account, she actually named someone, and which I think she lied about just because the fact that she would come home to England, and a single mum, unmarried, I think was too shameful for at the time. So I think she did make it up a bit. But yeah, she came home and published her journals, and it was a big success, really. Ellen went on to write for the majority of her life. She lived all the way until, when did she live? 1901, she died at the age of, I don't think I wrote it down, but she lived for a long time after, and yeah, wrote her whole life. I don't have anything else she wrote. I think that's just so long out of print. But yeah, that's your recommendation, and I really do recommend it. It's a very interesting first-hand account that I think should really be in print. Again, it's really lovely, very gossipy in a way that you wouldn't expect, but also doesn't pull any punches in telling the truth about what life was like back then. And I just absolutely loved it, rereading it and all that. I do have two other recommendations that you could do. Again, this is probably the most famous first-hand account. There's probably some others that I just can't find and all that. Especially it gets overshadowed because of Eureka. But obviously I think one of the more famous ones is The French Counsel's Wife. Can't remember who wrote it. But it was published in 1877, so a bit later on into the gold rush and all that. But I think the real recommendation I would give to you is History of the Australian Goldfields here, and who were there. This is an old classic. You can find it probably just in this edition, Australian Classics edition. It was edited by Nancy Kessing, and it's just first-hand account of the goldfields and all that from people who were there. Very lovely images that reflect the sad life of what they went through, and it's probably, I think, the best anthology of first-hand accounts living on the goldfields and all that. But again, Ellen's account is legendary just because she was such an outsider coming into the bush and all that. It's a classic in my opinion, and I think it's really great, and you should give it a try. And yeah, that's your AusBook recommendation for today. Go give it, Ellen, a try. You can find it for free. It's not that long of a book. And yeah, have you read it? Let me know what you think. And go check out this History of the Goldfields too if you want more of that, or go check out my video on the Gold Rush. But yeah, thank you so much for watching book 2, and I will see you next time.